Um, Hello, warm welcome to everyone for today's session. Uh, Good afternoon, good evening, based on wherever you are. And Today's session will focus on prioritization and structuring of climate projects. Myself, Anandan from Asia Leads Partnership, located in New Delhi, and I support managing the Secretariat services of the Asia Leads Partnership. This is the second webinar in the peer-to-peer learning webinar series that is focusing on subnational integration in the Asia Pacific region. As we all know, subnational governments play a critical role in achieving the climate targets set by national governments. This entire webinar series is being organized to foster capacity building, capacity development of the subnational governments. So here is today's agenda. First, we will have a quick introduction and a recap of what happened in the previous webinar. And then we have two distinguished speakers for today. The first one is Inadi Visser from GIZ. She will speak on city climate finance gap funding. Post that, we will have Q&A session. And the second speaker is Dr. Michael Linfield, and he is very experienced in the field of climate finance, and he will present on prioritization and structuring of climate projects. Post that, we will have Q&A session where you get opportunity to discuss with the speakers, and then we'll finally have closing and next steps. So before we move on, here is the quick housekeeping rules for today. Participants will be in mute mode for most of the session. And during Q&A session, you will be allowed to click, you will be unmuted. So we request you to click raise the hand icon that you see here, and then we could unmute you. And there is this Q&A box that you can see where you can send in your questions at any point of time during the discussion during the session, and that will be addressed during Q&A. And then simultaneous interpretation is available for the session in the languages of Bahasa, Indonesia, Vietnamese, and Chinese. As you see a globe option in the Zoom, if you click onto it, the languages will be displayed. English, that's the original, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Indonesia. Once you select your preferred language, then you could click mute original video for better audio experience. So if you have any difficulties, you can just send your messages in Q&A as well. So before we move on, we would like to give a very brief introduction about Asia Leads Partnership to the participants who are new to the platform. So the Asia Leads Partnership is a voluntary regional network that promotes and enables low emission, climate resilient development across the Asia and Pacific region. And we also support countries to achieve NDC and long-term low emission development strategies. It is ALP is one of the three regional platforms of Let's Global Partnership, which is hosted by GIZ under the support project of Paris Agreement supported by German government. And ALP is a network of more than 1,200 members. This includes 65 government ministries, agencies from 14 Asian countries. In general, at ALP, we identify and share tools, resource materials, we raise awareness, share success stories, we help to replicate projects, and we organize capacity building webinars such as these, and also bring about peer-to-peer learning between countries, etc. As a member, one gets access to all the resource materials and various other benefits of joining the activities and access to all the resources. So we encourage you to take the membership, which is free of cost. So I would like to give a very brief introduction about subnational integration communities of practice. For the sustained learning and peer-to-peer knowledge exchange, between member countries and between practitioners, we have launched several communities of practice on thematic areas. SNI Communities of Practice is one of the one of the 5 thematic CoPs run by Asia Leads Partnership. It focuses on multi-level climate governance. It helps group learning on this topic. And through this, we share tools, resource materials, new concepts. Free of cost technical assistance is being provided. In-person workshops are being organized. So as part of this webinar series, already we conducted climate planning session on 19th. This is the second session on prioritization and structuring of projects. There is an upcoming session on 27th of Jan that will focus on MRV for subnational governments. So under this communities of practice, we have 50 plus participants who are members of these communities of practice from these 7 countries. These are the other communities of practice managed by the Asia Leads Partnership in the sector of energy, transport, climate finance, and building energy efficiency. I'm not going to go into details, but in just an outlook, more than 300 participants representing around 20 Asian countries are members of this Asia Leads Partnership communities of practice. You could write to us to know more about these CoPs. You could also join these CoPs by clicking on the links that's given here. We'll share these slides later on and other materials with you. So here is the quick recap of the first session that was organized on 19th of Jan that focused on climate action planning guidance for subnational governments. This representation shows the tools, methodologies that could be used by subnational governments at various stages in the climate action planning. And an overview of some of the tools is given, was given in the first session. To be precise, here are the tools and methodologies that were discussed in the first session. Heat Plus is a tool that helps prepare GHG emission inventory and support climate action planning. Solutions Gateway is a tool that it's an online platform that provides solutions that could be used by local governments. And the rest, like Global Covenant of Mayors, Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, and CDP, ICLEI Unified Reporting System. All these platforms are knowledge sharing and reporting platforms. We also discussed a transformative action program that enables access to finance to scale up local climate action. So the links are given here for further read. We will also share the recording and presentations with you later on if you want to learn more about these. Yes, so that's all we have for the introduction. Now we would like to introduce the first speaker of the session, Inadi Visser from GIZ. Inadi Visser is the head of program for the City Climate Finance Gap Fund at the GIZ. She is serving at this position for the last 1 year since this was started. For about 15 years, she has been working in the energy and infrastructure sector with a focus on climate impact, especially in low and middle income countries. Her work experience include, she has worked in Tanzania, Germany, Ethiopia, some of the countries, and she's currently based at the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg. Without any further ado, I would like to invite Inadi Visser to deliver her presentation. Over to you, Ina.
Thank you very much. Exactly, let me check this. Yes, this works. Thank you very much for having me here. Very interesting group of people, interesting initiative where we really like to introduce you to the City Climate Finance Gap Fund for those of you who haven't heard about it yet. So yeah, I think this I don't even have to talk about very long. We see here that there's a gap with the immense estimated climate investment needs. These are the needs that are always talked about in the COPs, etc. Estimated 93 trillion US dollars. Whether it's a little bit more or less, it doesn't matter. The fact is that this is immense. So the need to invest more in climate if we want to make it to stick to the Paris goals, that is very clear. We also see that there's quite a bit of willingness to invest here, but we see that it's still difficult. Like the climate investments don't grow as fast as we had hoped, actually, or as we think would theoretically be possible. So what we see is that there's a big demand. You will know it from your cities. There's a big demand to invest in infrastructure. And climate infrastructure can be in many sectors. It can be public transport, non-motorized transport. We can look at the waste sector. I think that is always a very important sector to look at, waste management. We can look at energy efficiency in buildings. I know in some of the Asian cities is very necessary and has a lot of attention as well. So all these different sectors we can really look at when we think of climate. And of course, also the adaptation to climate change, resilience. So this could be water management. If you've seen droughts and a lack of drinking water for some cities, it could also be cities that are prone to flooding with climate change, etc. So there's an immense need there, which you will know even better than me for your cities. But going to financiers with these projects is not easy, and we realize that. And then it's also, how do you get them ready? Because you know, before a bank or anyone else, any other financier can look at this, you have to do a lot of work. So that is a little bit what I want to talk to you about. So how do we increase these finance flows? Probably by helping cities doing that work that you have to do before you can even go to a bank, because banks don't loan to good ideas. You know, they really need something very concrete before they even open the door or open your email. So that is what I want to talk a little bit about with you, and that is definitely one of the gaps that we have seen. Here you see the project planning, project development cycle. You probably know this. It's not really depicted in a cycle, but you can see what I mean. You have planning, strategy development. If we look at, for example, a public transport project, a BRT system or a metro in some of the big cities, you have a sustainable urban mobility plan, for example. You have a plan of where this public transport or transport as a whole, multimodal, etc., where that is going. Then you have the pre-feasibility. You look at different alternatives for different alternative solutions for your problem. Your problem might be traffic jams, and you have different alternatives for that. Is it non-motorized? Is it a BRT? Is it a metro? Is it yet something else? There you're going to look at it, and you're going to define your project. You look at alternatives and you think, okay, this is the best in this case. For example, you choose a metro. You know that you always have to make sure people can also get to the metro stations, etc. So that's really the project definition. With clear boundaries, this belongs to it. Then you go to feasibility. Financial feasibility, of course, technical feasibility, hopefully also economic feasibility, like, is this not only good for the financier or for the city itself, is it good for the whole city as a whole, including environmental impact, including social impact? What happens if you have to relocate people who are living there where you have where you build your rails, for example? So really looking at the whole impact of this project. Project structuring, very important. Who's in the end going to invest? Who's going to develop this project? Are you going to work together with private sector? And how do you guarantee that it's both attractive for the city and for the private sector? Finding this balance in a PPP is extremely difficult and extremely important. So really look at that. A procurement, who's going to build it, and then you have a transaction and investment and an implementation. You actually build it, and then of course operation, maintenance, etc. So it doesn't stop there, but my story stops there because I want to, as you see, I want to look at the left side of this slide in the early project preparation, because that is where we as the GAP Fund, our GAP refers to, is that there is very little assistance available in this part of the project preparation. It is high risk because a lot of plans will never go beyond plans. We all know that. It's not nice, but it's realistic. So it might be that, you know, there's plans and they turn out not to be realistic, or there's plans and turn out not to be a political buy-in for it, etc. So that really is where we work as the GAP Fund. I'm not saying that all the rest is easy, far from easy even. But we have defined that this is where we are going to provide our technical assistance. So the GAP Fund does not provide funds, loans, or investments, but the GAP Fund is an initiative of the European Investment Bank, the World Bank, and GIZ to really try to provide assistance in that time, really feed in also the knowledge of the banks, feed in, build capacity, see what, so that the cities understand when they talk to the bank later, because that's actually coming later in the project cycle, that you're prepared. So that is really what this GAP Fund is about. It's funded by the German and the Luxembourgish governments. So that means also the technical assistance is free of costs for the recipients. So the beneficiary, the city, or you might have utilities, urban utilities, etc. Those recipients do not pay for the technical assistance. So what do you see here? The few bullet points where the GAP Fund can collect, can assist data collection, the setting of targets. Very important. If you make a strategy, you also have to, you need to have your targets clear where it's going. So very political processes on the level of your municipality, but of course you cannot ignore your region or your national government. So it often has to fit, for example, in the national determined contributions, your NDCs of your country, etc. So that you're not like isolated and alone doing something, but that you have a broader commitment also from the national level. Then you need a lot of analysis, scenarios, how do you report on this? Climate strategies, these might have different names, or they might be more sectoral, but that's all under the part strategies, capacity development and institutional reform, and then origination project definition. Mostly that is the topic of today, and pre-feasibility. Where I must warn immediately, pre-feasibility is for many different people, it has many different meanings, really, what is still part of that. So it's also always worth for yourself as your city to check, okay, if we say we do pre-feasibility, what does it mean to us, and what does it mean to the people we are talking with? So if we look a little bit more into project definitions, and these are also the questions when we start working as a GAP Fund with the city, these are the questions we ask. It is fine if you can't answer all of them. So that is not, but it's really the questions to get an idea of where this project stands. How far are you? Are you in pre-feasibility? Are you in feasibility? Basically an easy question, but not always easy to answer. What actually is your investment project? What will be built? What will be implemented? And this is an important question because as a municipality, you do a lot of other things that are very important, but that are not investment projects. You might have a campaign to for awareness raising among your citizens on the importance of recycling. And that is great. And that is highly necessary, and it's a good thing for climate, it's a good thing for the environment, etc. But it's not an investment project. It's not something a bank can finance for you. So I think that is very important to split those two. What is a project? You might use the word project also for awareness raising, but what's project and what is an investment project? Which is, for example, saying, okay, we're gonna invest in a separate collection of organic waste, and we build a biogas plant, for example, maybe for direct use of biogas, maybe for producing electricity, I don't know, but that would be an investment project. If you say we just want to raise awareness among our citizens to recycle, to separate their waste, great, but it's not an investment project. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So why are you doing it? What is your rationale behind it? Have you analyzed alternatives and the benefits? So this is really, if you come to a bank or to the GAP fund or to other project preparation facilities with, for example, the idea of building a metro, they will ask you, have you thought of alternatives? This is not because they think a metro is wrong, not at all, but if you haven't analyzed whether a BRT can do the same for less money, then you don't know whether it's the best solution. It's a solution, a metro, but it's also, a metro is very expensive. For most cities, not at all attainable. Same in Europe, so that's no different. So really this analysis of alternatives is extremely important, because you have to not only prove that it's a good solution, you want to prove that it's the best solution for maybe the traffic jam problem that you have. So the rationale in this example would be, okay, congestion in the city. Congestion causes a lot of lost time, so economic losses. It's expensive in that sense. A bad air quality. I know in a lot of cities this is an extremely big problem. So health problems, etc. You can analyze alternatives. What do you do to solve this congestion? Do you promote cycling? Do you invest in a BRT, or do you, for example, invest in this metro? So this analysis of alternatives is extremely important. You have to prove that it's not only a good solution, but the best solution. And then the benefits. For if you say, okay, the rationale is my congestion, the best solution is a BRT system, for example. The benefits is not only that there's less traffic jam, because you know what I say, hell, if you can improve the air quality in a city, that has an immense impact often on health. You might have there might be wins on traffic safety. The number of accidents happening. So it's really the accessibility of transport to women, for example, who are maybe less likely, depending on the country, less likely to have a driver's license. So these are all things, benefits. Think big. Think the whole package. Don't only look at the financial or only at the problem that you're actually trying to solve, congestion, but see that there's more benefits very often if you look deeper into it. Then it's the who question. Who will invest? And the banks will always translate that as who's going to borrow from me? Who's going to take this loan? Who will own and operate the assets? This can be it can be very many different entities involved here. Is it the municipality themselves? Is it the urban utility? Or a traffic unit, traffic authority? Is it the private sector maybe? Are you gonna do a PPP one way or the other? Who will operate this? Maybe a company, even if the assets belong to the city. So there's many possibilities. Also here, it's not that one is wrong and the other one is right, but you have to find the best solution, which depend on a lot of factors. Who has the knowledge, the capacities to do that? Who will be most efficient? private sector might have more incentives to be efficient than a public entity, who can borrow. In a lot of countries, as a city, you cannot just go to an international bank and borrow. You know, there will be a lot of strings attached to it. And I say borrowing on purpose because climate finance consists largely of loans. Loans need to be paid back. So there are some grant facilities, but by and large, these will be loans that someone has to take. Someone has to take the risk. Most likely, if you go to a public bank, either on the national level or on the international level, you'll have your city will need a sovereign guarantee. You know that it's arranged with the national level to take the risk. So if a city cannot borrow for one reason or the other, or not enough, then maybe the private sector has to invest, or a ministry from the national level. So this is a very complicated question. Maybe Mike later, who's talking after me, I know he's a big expert on this also, and might say a bit more about that. And then the how. What is the project concept? Of course, how are you going to implement it? If you've decided on a BRT from A to B, you still have to define really, you know, where is the line going to run? Where will you have your stops, your bus stops? How will you make sure that people can get safely from their living area to the bus stop, and from the bus stop to their offices, for example? So this whole concept, broader concept, and the financial and economic feasibility. So financial feasibility, is it in the end paying off? Purely financially, are you looking at, you know, what can you earn with it? How can you pay off? What are the financial benefits? And the economic feasibility looks wider, whereas the benefits are bigger. If you can really improve air quality in your city, that is also a benefit that accounts in an economic feasibility analysis. If you can reduce the traffic deaths, maybe you make it safer, that is also something that counts in economic feasibility. So that's the broad picture for your whole city. The financial feasibility is the picture for the utility or the other entity that's going to manage this. So purely on in euros or rupees, or however you want to express that. So a lot of questions, of course. So as I said, we don't expect when people come to banks to get a loan, those are all the questions they will have to be able to answer. But I know there's a lot of projects out there that at this moment in time are not able to answer all those questions. Maybe 2 of the 5, maybe 3, but like you don't have it completely the ready package for a bank. So what can the Gap Fund offer to you? What can we as European Investment Bank, World Bank and GIZ potentially offer? It's a support with the strategy development. So really before you're actually developing your specific investment project. It's a little bit on capacity building. So understanding banks, understanding project preparation. Supporting at the prioritization of investments, because in your city a lot needs doing. Where are you starting? Are you going to do your waste system first, or your public transport? Are you going to do first your non-motorized transport, your parks, making it attractive to walk or cycle, or are you going to do the bus lane? So prioritization is very important. The definition of project concepts, preparing pre-feasibility. Supporting appropriate financial structuring, really, I would say more at the beginning of that, but really thinking, okay, how can this be done? And matchmaking with further support mechanism. So we offer support to close one gap. So what we cannot do, and I think it's very important to say that what we cannot do is guide a city through the process from A to Z. So we will support a city maybe for half a year or 9 months, where we are very much aware that the whole project cycle or whole project preparation is of course a lot longer in many cases. So, but it's really, we're looking for what can we help you with now? relatively on the short term. I hope I've piqued your interest a little bit in what we do, and I hope you can take one or two things home with you, some ideas. I would like to share here the website with you, so www.citygapfund.org. And this is the chapters you will find there. Specifically, I would like to point out two things, namely the Knowledge Hub. So you'll find a lot of documents, but sometimes also tutorials on YouTube, etc. That are linked here that are about urban infrastructure, where we think this is really good information. So that is in the Knowledge Hub, which everyone can access. So it's publicly available. So you don't have to do anything else than go to the website and click on Knowledge Hub and browse through what you, whether you can find anything that helps you. So that is one thing. And then the last bullet point here, apply for support. So that is if you think you might need support from the GAP Fund, or that we can help you in one way or the other, you can click the apply for support button. It is an application form in a simple PDF, a digital format, and we've made this on purpose quite easy to fill out. So it's not very complicated, will not take a lot of time. That comes to us, and then the three implementers, so World Bank, European Investment Bank, and GIZ, we will look at it and see whether it's indeed GAP Fund. So it has to be an urban project, has to have climate impact, and has to be an investment project, to be precise. It has to be in a middle or low income country. So we'll look at all that, and then we see what we can do, whether indeed we can talk to you to discuss together what we can do. So that's a bit of a process. We don't have standard products. We really want to see what you need. So that's why we will have a couple of calls with you to really define together what we can do, and then we provide assistance. So this is not for applying for loans. So that should be very clear. If your project is ready, the GAP Fund is not for you. And it's also not for funds instead of a financial fund. So it's for advisory. I think that should also be clear to you. You also see the frequently asked questions here and the eligibility criteria. So read through that before you apply. It's very helpful. Give some hints of do's and don'ts, and of the sectors that we work in, what we can exactly do, what we cannot do, also very important. But I would really like to invite you to apply. If you're not sure about applications, you can also contact us via the website, and see how you discuss with us before you apply, maybe even. That's also possible. ICLEI, ICLEI, I think an important actor also here in the Let's Asia. ICLEI also knows about us and has our contact. So you can also go to ICLEI and discuss with them, ICLEI Global specifically, but I'm sure ICLEI Asia can forward you to them and find out for you. So that's my invitation. Please, we are open very much for applications from Asia. So we hope to hear from you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ina. That was very interesting, and we hope many cities would come forward to receive this GAP funding. Before we move on to the question and answer session, we have a short quiz now. So my colleague Pratibha will share the details with you.
Thanks. Thanks, Anandan. Can we just have the slide where the QR code is? If you can put up that slide, or else I can. Great. So thank you, Ina, for your presentation. And based on Ina's presentation, we would like to have a short quiz just to rack your brains a little and to refresh them. So if you can maybe possibly take out your mobile phones and you can scan this code, or else you can copy the link. This is, you can join it at ahaslides.com/XA5NV. And I have, and please answer the questions. So I will now move on to, if everybody has taken note of the link as well as the QR code, I can maybe in some time share the results of some of the answers that we have received. Yeah. So we have from representatives from Dhaka who have joined. So far, one answer has come in. And if you have answered the first question, which is which city or region do you represent? We can move on to the second question, which is based on Ina's slide, which is what is the estimated climate investment gap? One of them, the answers is correct. So please choose. I can now start sharing my slide screen. So maybe you can I have the sharing rights, please? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just to get a little bit of understanding of who the participants are. So we have from wide range. So we have from Philippines, we have from Dhaka, Berlin, Coimbatore in India. Please continue. So there's no limit or time limit on this. So as and when, please continue to respond, and it would be great to interact with you and know from which region you belong. The second question is on what is the estimated climate investment gap? So is it $1.5 trillion, $15 trillion, $4.5 trillion, or $95 trillion? So we have, okay, so 66%, okay, now 70% have responded, and I can maybe show the correct answer now. And yes, so 70% have answered correctly, and it is $4.5 trillion. Moving on to the second question, this maybe you can think about as we move on to the question and answer session as well. So in your city or region, what are the gaps that need to be addressed? So this will greatly help us in also supporting you as part of the City Climate Finance Gap Fund as well. So to help you in at what stage that you most the help that you require. So we do have a large majority who have in fact said that planning and strategy development phase is the one that they critically need support in. So we will in fact reach out to you later on after this session as well. Ina, would you, as the numbers come in, would you like to respond to some of the results that we are getting in, especially on this slide, possibly?
Were you asking me? Or
yes. Sorry, I can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, no problem. Excellent. I find this very interesting. So I'm watching here with great interest, and I can totally imagine. So I also think all of these can be gaps. So it really depends on where you stand, and you might see, like, depending which sector you are from or what you're working on in your sector, in your city. I can imagine that, for example, the waste project that your city is developing might already be at feasibility, but your bus rapid transit, to get back to that, is only at the strategy level. So this can happen in a city at the same time. And we see a large share at the left of the screen. So the planning, strategy, development, and the project definition. So in these early stages. And I said it's not all, but that is where we work. So of course it's good to see that there are still some issues there. Otherwise we would have put our money on the wrong bet on the wrong horse. So that is good to see. And those who specifically are working on climate-related issues, infrastructure-related issues, could have a look at our website, whether it could maybe be of interest for you.
Great. Thank you so much. So for now, I think I'll stop sharing my screen and for the quiz, and we can continue with the question and answer session. So from the audience, if you have any burning questions, please feel free to ask at this point. And if you would like to ask in person, and you can raise your hand and ask them. We can unmute you, and you can ask your question as well. So please join actively during this session and get all the information that you need from Aina at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratibha. I think we have this is not a question, but that's a comment from Sri Handayani from Medan City. Would you like to comment anything, or would you have anything to share, Sri Handayani? Okay, I think Reni has raised a hand. So Sashi or Ritwik, could you please unmute Reni? Okay, so while we get the questions, okay, Reni, you're unmuted. You could speak up. All right, Reni, you're muted. You could unmute and speak. So maybe one question to you in the meantime. So from your point of view, what is the key critical barrier for cities to access financing? This is a very generic question, but if there is something something in specific that is preventing them.
I think so. There can be many things. There can be many things, but I think what is quite difficult in some countries, and this is not the same in every country. So you should always check how it is in your own country, of course. But what we see very often is that it's also access to finance in general for cities is very difficult, and so it's not always possible just to get a loan. And we all know, of course, we want grant funding. You want, actually, for your project, you want an investment grant, but we have to be realistic. There are very few available, and the ones that are available are very hard to get. So you have to be realistic. Maybe there's some banks have some blended products which say, okay, it's a bit grant and it's a loan together. So all in all, it's like a cheaper loan. You can have loans where you, for example, concessional loans where you only start paying after 5 or 6 years. So there's all these things to make loans more attractive, but we have to be realistic. Big projects will need a loan. And when you're working on these projects, you have to think of that immediately. So I know, for example, a very little bit, but a little bit about Indonesia, where you have to get into the blue book if you need loans. So you have to make sure the national government has some say in this, what you can, where you can borrow as a city. So if you forget about that and only think about grant funding, you might be a bit late. Then suddenly your project is quite far already in development, and you've never thought of getting a loan. So I hate to bring bad news, but it simply is not very realistic to do big infrastructure projects on grant funding. So or on full grant funding. There might be a bit of grant, but thinking of this immediately from the start, like how can we structure this? This doesn't come only at the end where you have all your bus system ready and then you think, oh, who's actually gonna operate this? Who's gonna buy the buses? Who's gonna pay for the bus lane? So thinking that also from the beginning, take that on and see how your city can borrow money. What are the processes for this? Because these are often not 2 million euros, you know, they're often a lot more. So I think not forgetting about that, and yes, go try find grant funding, but it's not so likely that you can fully do it like that.
All right, Ina. There's one more question to you. So how much funding is actually available for individual projects? You know, what is the scale of funding that is available as gap funding, and whether it's a grant or loan, in what format?
Yes, so it is not funding as such, but it's advisory. So if we say how big it is, we really look at what we can do for the city. And of course, if there is like a medium-sized Asian city, which you in Asia call medium-sized, but we in Europe would call a very big city because we have different concept of that. So if we say, for example, a medium-sized Asian city, and you do a big project, we can probably contribute more to you than when you're a medium-sized African city, who are a lot smaller than medium-sized Asian city, and you do something small. So we really look at how we can help you. But I think the best way to say it is that you get a couple of advisors for 6 to 9 months to help you. And we look together with you what kind of advisors these are. Is it someone who's mostly looking at financial structures, or is it someone who is an expert in biogas and will help you, or in waste collection and will help you with the city scale biogas plant, plus maybe a legal expert of how you can produce electricity and sell it on the market, because this is often a legal and not a technical question. So we really look with you what you need, and you will get these advisors. So we do not transfer money. I want to make that very clear, but these advisors are for free. So there will be no cost of you in any way. We expect you to work with them, and that if you know, the advisors are in your municipality, maybe you have like a workstation for them. They will bring their laptop and sit with you, but that's the kind of contribution we request.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ina. That was very clear and very helpful. And considering the time limitation, I think we'll move on to the next speaker for now. And if participants have any further questions, please feel free to send your questions in Q&A box. And thank you so much to you, Ina, for answering the questions. And we'll move on to the next speaker. Michael will present on prioritization and structuring of climate projects. Michael is an economist and a financial analyst with over 3 decades of rich experience in international sustainable urban development, policy formulation, and financing. And he is a principal urban specialist and chair of the Urban Community of Practice at ADB. Currently, he is engaged as an urban advisor to various international eminent organizations, including GCF, German government, Ministry of Environment, GIZ, C40, Cities Climate Finance Facility. So he is also associated with EU and ADB projects and initiatives. We welcome Michael. Over to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Anand, and thank you for inviting me. Okay, today, yes, here we go. It's actually a very good fit because I'm going to really take off from where Ina finished in terms of trying to go into more detail about prioritization and structuring of projects for climate finance. Now, the issue here is that each one of these 2 topics, prioritization and structuring of projects, could take an hour-long lecture at least. So we're going to have to move fairly quickly through this. You're faced with another project development cycle. The key part of this slide as far as my presentation is concerned. I really wanted to show the difference in that there are a number of different actors involved, and that the project prioritization, but then in particular the project structuring process requires interaction with a range of different actors, and that is something that needs to be done mainly by the cities themselves, and that with the assistance of consultants. The two areas that I really wanted to focus on are the development plan and needs investment plan, and the feasibility study and design part, which provide us with the basis for the prioritization and the project structuring. Okay. So just digging down into those issues, the planning is the basis for prioritization. The one project exists within a set of spatial and sectoral plans within the city. It needs to have that basis for prioritization and the objectives, and it needs to be done within the context of the budget of the city, and how it just sort of sits within the investment plan. I'll come to more detail on that in a minute. Okay, there's then a detailed design feasibility study, which I'm not going to go into, because the project structuring usually it needs to be done in the clear understanding of the technical options for the project and the costing. And then finally, the financial close happens after a successful project structuring exercise. So when it comes to project structuring, you need to know not just about the finance, but also where the funding for the project is going to come from. And so what I'm talking about is that finance generally is looking at the finance of the capital costs, but a project will have both an operations and maintenance cost. And if you borrow money, then it will also need an ongoing stream of revenue to service that borrowing. And this is something that becomes very much important within the project structuring process. But I'll give an example of that later. So I wanted to go into more detail about this climate finance and funding issue. If we look in the middle of this slide, you see that there is what we might call a demand organization, which is the various, if you like, the financing institution, and then there's the implementing organization, which will be the one who's taking out the loan or getting the grant, for that matter. The financing organization needs to put together a financial package, and these financing packages may just be grants, they might be grants, loans, they might be grants, loans, and equity, and then those various financial instruments can come from various financing sources. So that's on the financing side. On the funding side, there needs to be understanding of where money is going to be coming from to repay the financing. So revenues such as tax transfers, etc. And then the other sources is user charges. We need to understand that when we are putting together the project and putting together the financial structuring. The issue is that with climate finance, all of these things can be a bit more difficult. For a start, climate financing instruments are limited, and sometimes they're difficult to structure and access because the application forms are much more difficult. The development of climate projects tends to require more inputs from a range of technical expertise, which is not necessarily available. There needs to be a better awareness of the access to climate finance instruments, and often local governments don't talk the same language as the financiers. There is sometimes a lack of incentives to use climate finance instruments, and indeed, things like green bonds sometimes are actually more expensive to put together than ordinary bonds, so that has to be taken into account. On the funding side, what is the capacity to recover the extra costs? Climate financing instruments often need what we call monitoring, reporting, and validation work, and you need to cover those costs in some way. And then there often are, if you're talking about a private sector project, if a climate project is more expensive than a traditional project, is there any kind of financing available to cover the difference between what would be a commercially viable project using traditional technologies and one which is using climate relevant and climate positive technologies? So all of those constraints need to be addressed in terms of the looking at projects and how they need to be prioritized. To do that, oops, that's interesting. There needs to be a set of processes underpinning city climate finance. There needs to be mechanisms of downscaling climate priorities to the city level. This is being done. ADB is developing mechanisms and methodologies for doing this. Others are also trying. There needs to be two sets of climate assessments if you're doing mitigation and adaptation projects. Climate mitigation analysis, which needs to have a greenhouse gas emissions, climate risk and vulnerability assessment if you're doing adaptation projects. Both of those need to be based with evidence, particularly if you're trying to access financing such as the Green Climate Fund that insists on a very high level of validation of the projects. Then there also needs to be looking at new systems of spatial planning, taking the plans and developing an investment plan of the projects that are identified within the plan, and then looking at the financing options for those projects, and then looking at governments and institutional structures to actually implement the projects. And I'll go into more detail on that when I talk about climate finance. There is also the issue of climate-informed project appraisal, which is not the same thing as standard project appraisal, where in climate-informed project appraisal, other criteria come into the mix. And then finally, there's the monitoring, evaluation, and learning from implementation based on MRV systems. Now, when we talk about planning outputs, those outputs enable us to actually do the prioritization, but we can't do a prioritization unless the actual outcome of the planning provides enough information about the projects that need to be prioritized. So the kind of activities that we're talking about are the C40 climate action plans and the Global Covenant of Mayors. It's not strategic, it's sustainable energy and climate action plans, CCAPs. We need to be able to describe the projects. I'm not going to go through all of these headings, but we need to be able to describe the project in detail so that the prioritization exercise can be done on the objectives and within the budget of the projects. And I, again, could go into half an hour explaining how this prioritization exercise needs to be done, but we don't have that. The other thing that needs to be thought about is something that Ina mentioned, and this is very important, that what are the criteria that the financing institutions are going to be using? If you look at the Green Climate Fund, when I was working for Asian Development Bank, we were developing a fund in China, the Shandong Green Development Fund, and we looked specifically at the criteria that the GCF were using to assess projects. And they have 6 different sets of criteria. One is about impact, greenhouse gas reduction and adaptation, paradigm shift, looking at scaling up and replication, sustainable development, looking at co-benefits, economic, social, environmental co-benefits, needs of recipient and ownership. In other words, can the project entity actually implement the project, and the effectiveness. And so in terms of climate benefits, it's things like the cost abatement number, like the US dollars per ton carbon, saved. So those kind of criteria were applied by the financing project, the financing side of the project. When you develop your project and you're thinking about what kind of financing mechanisms you're going to be using, you need to understand what the criteria are that financing institutions will use. In addition, just to show that it's not quite that simple even, within the fund, we prioritized different categories of investments according to the impact that these different types of projects had on the greenhouse gas profile of the province. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was demand side and the financing assessment steps. Thinking about what kind of financing you want to use. First of all, as I said before, you're talking about a project within an envelope of a budget, and you're talking about different types of projects. So in a sense, you're comparing apples and oranges. And so there needs to be a mechanism of prioritizing across different sectors. And that usually is done through a thing called multi-criteria analysis, MCA. Again, I can't go into detail in given the time we have, but the basis of it is that we need to decide what are the objectives of the investment program, and then we apply these criteria across the different projects. There's also a difference between what are small projects that could be done just using current revenue, and those larger projects that can be bundled into investment projects that can at least be partially financed. The market sounding then, if projects are potentially financed through revenues, or there is money available for governments to do availability payments, then a market sounding can be done to look at who's interested in financing them. And then you need to rank your prioritized projects against your budget. And then after you do that, you need to think about, if you have identified areas where you want private sector financing, you need to think about what kind of structures you can use to actually get that financing in place. If you're talking about private sector financing, you sometimes are talking about equity as well as debt. And then you need to think about how to put a structure in place that equity can go into the financing of a project. So those demand side steps are important, and I'll give examples. But so with the Asian Development Bank, we did an exercise like this in Ho Chi Minh City, and we came up with a set of priority investment program investment projects, and then we sort of put those projects against the budget and prioritize them in the way that I just talked about. So lastly, I wanted to talk about this mechanism of structuring. Once you actually have a prioritized project, what is the mechanism that is used to actually undertake the structuring process? What are the things that you need to do to consider what are the, how you should structure a project? So this is an example from the C40 Cities Finance Facility looking at Mexico City. And there's an e-bus corridor within Mexico City. This was a really interesting project. And the bottom of the slide has fallen off. So I can't get all the way to the bottom, but anyway, we'll try. The interesting thing about this project is that the clear definition of project performance objectives for this project enabled a very efficient financing mechanism and a choice of technical options to be undertaken. So in terms of structuring, the questions that you need to ask about what's the institutional context? Labor agreements, which is very important in Mexico. What are the user fees, fares, and charges that can be actually accrue to the project? Then looking at the technical options that actually meet the performance objectives. So what are the costs by component? And this is important because not every component needs to be financed in the same way. And then other issues that are important, like what are the depot implications of different technical options. So it might look at what different kinds of land use or land implications for right-of-ways there are. So there are other options as well that might be very complicating when it comes to implementation. Then find what are the operational models, again by component if necessary. And with relationship to the Mexico City project, we looked at this very large range of options, looking at a public operation only, a public operation with leasing, public operation with leasing and maintenance contract, a design, construction, and maintenance DVM scenario, a trunk concession scenario, exclusive operation, and a PPP. So all of these different models were looked at and assessed. And each of them was looked at in terms of the revenue assessment and subsidy sources and the risk assessment. Oops, that's not what I'm supposed to do. And right, why is that happening? There we go. So the chosen procurement method was the design, build, and maintain method with a basis of a 10-year contract period. The technical options were between straight electric buses and between buses that were manufactured in Mexico, but they were trolley buses, so buses with the stanchions and the electric lines going over above. They turned out to be like half the cost of imported electric buses, and were extremely efficient way of doing this project. Some people don't like the overhead wires, but the difference in cost is huge. Proposed the initial financing, the city of Mexico City identified and ring-fenced recurrent revenue and based their debt that they took out from the development bank on that recurrent revenue. The recurrent revenue had to include the operating subsidy, and they also included donation of land for the depot. So this project structuring was a process that went through a rigorous set of analysis that made sure that the best possible institutional option was chosen. But then the next thing is that the institutional option needed to be embodied in a special purpose vehicle, which enabled the private sector to undertake the DBM project. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael, for clearly detailing the supply side criteria, demand side steps needed to access funds, all of that, and also the very good example of structuring from Mexico City. That was really insightful and helpful. And before we move on to the all right, Ina is asked to leave. Thank you, Ina, for joining us today. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Yeah. All right. So before we move on to the question answer session, here we have a very short quiz. So my colleague Pratibha will again take over.
Yes. So thanks, Anandan. It's the same link again. And if you can please go on to the website again. And the question this time is, in your city or region, what are the most popular climate investment projects? This will help us to identify the key areas that we need to take into consideration. So you can just quickly answer that. Yeah, so I'll just share my screen since the answers have started coming up. Yeah. Oh, so wow. So we have a 50-50, I mean, an equal portion of renewable energy efficiency, green transportation, and green and smart cities. So they are all popular in the participants. Okay, majority having renewable energy. Moving on, there's another question while you answer this. The other question is, this you might take a bit of time while you ask Michael also some of your clarifications, are what are the critical constraints to climate finance in your specific city and region? This will also help us to identify the support that we can provide to each one of you as well. So great. I think we can, yes. While we wait for the answers, I think we can move on to the, as with time constraint, we can move on to the question and answer session. Over to you, Anandan.
All right. Thank you, Pratibha. One request to participants, if you have any questions, you can directly ask the speaker as well. You can also send your questions in Q&A box. And if you click raise the hand icon, we'll unmute you so that you can directly interact with the speaker. Michael, while participants send their questions, maybe I would like to ask regarding the last question, what is the critical constraint in accessing finance from your opinion, generically?
Yeah, I think it's generally the ability to formulate a project that actually answers the criteria of the specific climate finance institution. Now, the thing is that we might want to take a step back and say, what is climate finance? Is climate finance explicitly finance that is labeled as climate finance? Like, is it just green bonds? Is it just finance from the Green Climate Fund? Is it just finance that is coming from funds within the MDBs that are labeled as climate finance? Or is it any finance that is actually enabling a city to implement a climate positive project? And I would say it's the latter. I would say that it doesn't matter whether the finance that you're talking about is labeled as green finance or not. Sometimes green finance is more expensive. Sometimes it's not, but and often it's more difficult to get. So if it's easier, quicker, and cheaper to go to the local development bank to finance your renewable energy project, then by all means do that. I think so the critical constraint then becomes formulation of a project that is actually climate positive, not so much the kind of flow of financing from specialist climate funds.
All right, sure. Thank you, Michael. Another question to you. So you have worked with many international organizations, financing all of that. So could you share some insight on some international capacity building programs focusing on cities that which cities could access to? Not all of it, but something interesting that you would like to share.
Yeah. Okay. I think there's it's a huge range but in terms of climate finance, I think that the city's climate finance facility under C40 has a capacity building component that I think is very useful. They generally do this in countries where they have an anchor project, but those anchor projects are the kind of the capacity building component is built out from the core city, and they often participate in webinars about and focused on project finance. So I think that's really important. There's not that much out there that actually focuses directly on capacity building for project finance. The other set of resources comes from CCFLA, Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, and I think there are good resources on their website as well.
All right.
Those two.
All right, sure. Thank you. Of course, there's a range of things, but thank you for spotting some, and that's helpful. And there's one more question, Michael. So whenever prioritization has to be done in general, always there is a consultation process to be adopted. So do you have any insights? Do you want to throw some light on the process to be adopted, methods, especially the consultation process, holistically bringing several parties into this discussion? And is there any takeaway that a city too should consider?
Yeah, well, it varies. I mean, as to how wide the consultation process is, I would say it's very important to try and involve the people who are going to be impacted by the project positively and negatively. And even though something is a climate project, it does not mean that it will not have negative impacts on somebody. Sometimes renewable energy projects, etc., require land acquisition, etc. And so I think it's really important. I think that even projects that are intended to benefit a set of recipients, if their lives are disrupted in that process, then that may lead to opposition, which will lead to the failure of the project. There was a very good example in Jakarta about people who were moved out of the drainage reserves, and that indirectly led to the resignation of the governor. So I think it's really important that consultation process be wide and consider people who are going to be impacted. Then I also think that the kind of criteria that you want to be used, that should be used in a multi-criteria analysis could be developed in consultation with those communities. And that being said, that's not always done. It's not done in Australia either. And so, yeah.
Sure. So there is a question, another question. So this is regarding attracting private investors. So for projects that has clear revenue streams, example, green public transport, it seems easier to attract private investors. What about the projects that has no clear revenue streams, such as green public spaces, afforestation? Any practices involving private partners of this kind of projects?
Yeah, okay. Yes, you're right that there projects that actually have a revenue stream are easier to involve the private sector, but in fact, in a lot of jurisdictions, and Australia is considered to be one of the most advanced in PPP projects, and I always say that's because Australia has made every mistake it is possible to make when it comes to PPPs. So we know what we should not do, it is possible to do PPP projects based on availability payments from the government, providing there is a clear, ring-fenced and sustainable subsidy. So that if there is a revenue stream that can be dedicated to an availability payment, then you can certainly do PPPs that way. So given that structure, it is not just projects that have revenue streams, and therefore adaptation projects, which are notoriously difficult to finance, can be financed in that way, if there is going to be a private sector developer, for want of a better word, of say a nature park, then a revenue stream could be dedicated through an availability payment to that sort of developer. The other thing, though, is that very often projects without direct revenue streams can be financed through what is called land value capture. And this is a very common method used in Latin America, but it is very rare in Asia. It's not used much in the West either, although Australia has a thing called a local rate or a development levy, and the US has TIF, or there's the tax increment financing, both based on if you are going to do a project that helps an area, like improved drainage or puts a park in, develops and makes a better park, you could levy a local rate that means that the land tax is incremented by some amount to pay for that project. It is in most Asian countries except China, it is technically possible to do that, but it is not implemented.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael, for the detailed answer. We'll just take one last question. So if there are further questions, participant can send it to Asia Let's Partnership. So this question is on the projects. Are there projects that are typically not prioritized for climate finance? That is, projects that are usually less attractive or don't make good projects for investment?
Yes, there are. Well, yeah, but I'm thinking of basically any projects that have anything to do with fossil fuels. And I'm not just talking about coal-fired power plants. I'm talking about LNG depots or LNG pipelines or anything to do with you know, coal railroads or any kind of transport for fossil fuels. That is well, some funds like the Green Climate Fund, for example, just simply will not fund them, and otherwise it is very difficult to do. So that's one area that is absolutely not financeable by climate finance. The other area, interestingly enough, is probably the things like in some countries, things like renewable energy are now so attractive financially that climate finance institutions won't finance them. So, you know, in things like wind farms, where the feed-in tariff is reasonable, the private sector can do that by themselves. So at both ends of the spectrum, on the one hand, you know, fossil fuels out. On the other hand, renewable energy that is actually financially viable probably won't get financed either.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. So we'll move on to the next slide. We'll just inform about the next steps and we'll close. We have a short survey after the end of the session. We request participants to provide inputs by completing it. It won't take more than 2-3 minutes. The next session is planned on climate action at subnational level, the role and importance of MRV. It's on 27th of Jan. We will send registration link details to all the participants. So we look forward to see you, most of you there as well. So to plan that MRV session, if there are any inputs, questions, or any expectations that you have towards that session, you want to learn anything in specific, you can let us know. That would be, we will aim to cover that in the next session as well. And we encourage you to join this SNI Communities of Practice. And of course, some technical assistance are available to developing countries, subnational governments. You could write to us to avail it. And if there are any other priorities, please feel free to inform us. And finally, we would like to thank the speakers. Thank you, Michael. Ina is not here, and we appreciate your time. And thank you so much for joining us today. And also, we thank all the participants for your support. If there are any further questions or anything you want to learn more about, you can write to Asia Leads Partnership. Michael, do you have any final words that you want to share before we close?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. And like I say, I think this topic is a very detailed one. I think that is something that yeah, more support is needed from the international community to go into prioritization and things like project structuring. And there are things in the works. Some of the development banks are, and I know the German Ministry of the Environment is interested in doing this as well. So keep a lookout. I think there is going to be some support coming for these sorts of things.
All right, Michael. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you one and all. Yeah, we wish you a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.